Hello, this lecture is for ISOL 631, Chapter 7 in the Security Policies and Implementation Issues textbook. The chapter is how to design, organize, implement, and maintain IT security policies. So it binds well-formed IT security policies together is a sense of shared beliefs, purpose, and urgency. Within your organization, you will achieve that in part by establishing policies that create a shared vision, by empowering others to act, and by institutionalizing support processes. It's important that the implementation of IT security policies becomes second nature to the organization. That is, the business processes should be designed with the controls needed to implement and maintain security policies built in. This chapter gives you a micro look into each document within the collection of policy framework documents. So the learning objective of this chapter, to describe how to design, organize, implement, and maintain IT security policies. So the topics that will be covered include which principles and concepts are important in the design of policy, how to organize the concepts of the IT policy framework, what to consider when implementing the policy and standards library, what the importance of the policy change control board is, how to maintain the policy and standards library over time, what best practices are for the policies and standards maintenance, and what some case studies and examples of IT security policy and management and maintenance are. So the key concepts we'll look at for this chapter are core principles of policy and standard design, implementing policy and libraries, policy change control board purpose and roles, business drivers for policy and standards changes, and best practices for policy management and maintenance. So the goals of this chapter include describe the character of a good policy, a standard that meets the organizational needs, describe the core security policies the policy writers should keep in mind when developing policies, explain what an architecture operating model is and why it's important, explain the review and approval process for policies, standards, procedures, and guidance documents, explain the document publication and training and awareness processes needed for policies and standards, explain the role and activities of the Policy Change Control Board, and describe the processes needed for maintaining and updating the policies and standards. So the architectural operating model, we have 4 business model concepts. The first one is diversified. In the diversified operating model, technology solution has a low level of integration and standardization with the enterprise. Typically, the exchange of data and use of services outside the business unit itself is minimal. Coordinated. In the coordinated operating model, technology solution shares data across the enterprise. However, the level of shared service and standardization are minimal. Replicated. In the replicated operating model, the technology solution shares services across the enterprise. However, the level of data sharing is minimal. And then unified. In the unified operating model, technology solution both shares data and has standardized services across the enterprise. Aligning operating model concepts. An architecture operating model can help you understand how the security controls are to be implemented. One issue over which disagreement often arises is how much security should be centralized or decentralized within an organization. A discussion of the architecture operating model within the company can identify areas of disagreement and create a common set of beliefs on the proper placement and implementation of controls. There are different ways to have this broad architectural conversation. One way is to analyze and categorize the primary operating model of the business on the basis of four concepts: diversified, controlled, replicated, and unified, like we looked at in the last slide. As you can see in the figure on the screen, these operating model concepts are aligned with how the businesses choose to integrate and standardize with an enterprise solution. In general, the higher level of integration and standardization in an enterprise solution, the easier it is to implement security policies. So the policies and standards development core principles. No two organizations or risk assessment outcomes are the same. There are no universal recipes for building an IT security program. Instead, principles help you make decisions in new situations arising, proven experience, and industry best practices. By considering several principles, you can derive control requirements and help make implementation decisions. Using the following principles we'll look at in the next 3 slides will help you to develop policies, standards, baselines, procedures, and guidelines. These are the common core security principles recommended for industry and best practices, regardless of the organization's business nature. So the first one, accountability principle. The personal responsibility of information systems security should be explicit. Some roles in an organization are accountable only for the work they perform daily. Other roles are accountable for their own work plus all the work performed by the team of employees. Accountability helps to ensure that people understand they are solely responsible for actions they take while using organization resources. You can think of accountability as a deterrent control. The awareness principle. Owners, providers, and users of information systems, as well as other parties, should be informed of the existence and general context of policies, responsibilities, practices, procedures, and organization for security of information systems. Ethics. The ethics principle, the way of information systems are designed and level of access to data reflected in security controls should operate in accordance with the organization's ethical standards. This includes the level of disclosure and access to customer data. Multidisciplinary principle. Policy and standards library documents should be written to consider everyone affected, including technical, administrative, organizational, operational, commercial, educational, and legal personnel. Proportionality principle. Security levels, costs, practices, and procedures should be appropriate and proportionate to the value of the data and the degree of reliance on the system. It should also be proportional to the potential severity, probability, and extent of harm to the system or loss of the data. In other words, don't spend $1,000 to protect $500 worth of assets. And also the integral policy. Your documents should be coordinated and integrated with each other. They should also integrate with other relevant measures, practices, and procedures for a coherent system of security. Defense in depth principle. Security increases when it is implemented as a series of overlapping layers of controls and countermeasures that provide three elements of secure assets: prevention, detection, and response. This is referred to as defense in depth. It is both a military concept and an information security concept. Defense in depth dictates that security mechanisms be layered so that the weaknesses of one mechanism are countered by the strengths of two or more other mechanisms. Timeliness principle. All personnel, assigned agents, and third-party providers should act in a timely and coordinated manner to prevent and to respond to breaches of the security. The assessment principle. The security of information systems should be periodically reassessed. Risks to technology change daily, and periodic reassessments are needed to ensure that security requirements and practices are kept current with these changes. Standards also need reassessments at least annually to assure they represent the current state of affairs. The democracy principle. The security of an information system should be balanced against the rights of customers, users, and other people affected by the system versus your rights as the owners and operators of these systems. In other words, consider your users or partners when requiring information that could be placed their privacy rights at risk. Internal control principle. Information security forms the core of an organization's information internal control system. Regulations mandate that internal control systems be in place and operating correctly. Organizations rely on technology to maintain business records. It's essential that such technology include internal control mechanisms. These maintain the integrity of the information and represent a true picture of the organization's activities. And then the adversary principle. Controls, security strategies, architectures, and policy library documents should be developed and implemented in anticipation of attack from intelligent, rational, and irrational adversaries who may intend harm. The least privilege. Least people should be granted only enough privilege to accomplish assigned tasks and no more. The separation of duty principle. Responsibilities and privileges should be divided to prevent a person or a small group of collaborating people from inappropriately controlling multiple key aspects of a process and causing harm or loss. For example, in an accounting department, the person preparing invoices for payment should not be the same person writing the checks for payment. Continuity principle. Identify your organization's needs for disaster recovery and continuity of operations. Prepare for the organization and its information system accordingly. Simplicity principle. Try to favor small and simple safeguards over large and complex ones. Security is improved when it's made simpler. And then also policy-centered security principle. Policies, standards, and procedures should be established at the formal basis for managing and planning, control, and evaluation of all information security activities. Transparency with customer data. Policies related to the handling and use of customer data should include the concept of transparency. Organizations should be transparent and should notify individuals of the collection, use, dissemination, and maintenance of personally identifiable information, many times referred to as PII. PII is information that can be used to identify a specific person. This can be something used alone, such as a person's name. Transparency with regard to handling customer data should include the following elements. Individual participation. Organizations should involve the individual in the process of using PII and seek individual consent. This consent should include the collection, use, dissemination, and maintenance of PII. Organizations should also provide mechanisms for appropriate access, correction, and redress regarding use of PII. Purpose specification. Organizations should specifically describe the authority that permits the collection of PII and articulate the purpose or purposes for which they intend to use data. Data minimization. Organizations should collect only PII that is directly relevant and necessary to accomplish the specific purpose or purposes. Additionally, they should retain PII only for as long as is necessary to fulfill those specific purposes. And use limitation. Organizations should use PII solely for the purposes specified. If PII is shared, it should be for a purpose for which it was collected. Security controls categorization schemes. So security controls can be described according to two different categorization schemes. One based upon what the control is, the other based upon what the control does. The first category includes the administrative, technical, and physical control categories. These describe what the control actually is, such as a named process, a standard, a firewall, or a locked door. So what is the control? First one is administrative controls of the policies, standards, and procedures that guide employees when conducting the organization's business. Pre-employment screening of personnel and a change management process are also examples of administrative controls. Technical security controls are the devices, protocols, and other technology used to protect assets. These include antivirus systems, cryptography systems, and firewalls, and more. Physical security controls are the devices used to control physical access. Examples here are fences, security guards, locked doors, motion detectors, and alarms. The second set of controls describe what controls do. These controls include preventive security controls, prevent intentional or unintentional security threats, Examples include network access policies, firewall rules, locks on wiring closets, and server room doors. Detective or response controls act like alarms and warnings. These controls kick in after an incident begins. Examples include motion detectors, log files, and files that contain system audit information. Corrective controls help you respond to and fix a security incident. Corrective controls are also used to limit or stop further damage. Some examples include cleaning a virus off a system, closing a firewall port, and blocking an internet protocol or IP address. And recovery controls help you put a system back into operation once an incident ends. Disaster recovery and tape backups fit into this category. There is significant overlap between security control categories. Some controls can be administrative and preventive, or technical and corrective, or any combination. This overlap occurs by design for the purpose implementing the principles of defense in depth. The Security Policy and Standards Library Taxonomy. While there are many ways to organize a library of policies, one thing they all have in common is the need for a numbering scheme. The numbering scheme helps you organize the material by topic and become a quick reference point for people to use to refer to specific content. You can create your own numbering scheme or use an existing one. Should you decide to use an existing framework like ISO IEC 27002, you can begin with the taxonomy it provides. The figure on the screen offers an example that you might consider using for your taxonomy. You can look at this figure as a sideways tree, and this will continue on for a few slides. The program level policy or information security charter on the left side is the root. It establishes the tree and delegates the authority for managing the tree to the information security department of the organization. Let's call it IS for information security, POL for policy, and add 001 because it's the first document. So it is ISPOL 001. To the right, you find a collection of program framework policies. This framework uses ISO IEC 27002 topics for policy types. They're numbered in groups of 100 to allow for growth. Each of these policies stands on its own and serves as the first major branch of the tree. From these branches, standards and their supporting documents appear. Look at the Access Control ISPOL 800 framework policy as an example. You can see control standard labeled ISCSTD 810 through 840. The CSTD label is short for Control Standard. The figure shows just this part of the policy and standards library. Baseline standards are then numbered so to maintain the consistency of the taxonomy and support the control standards upon which they're based. The baseline standards are specific to technology and numbered as IS-BSTD 821 and 822, where BSTD stands for Baseline Standard. These two standards define the requirements for password management as they pertain to the Windows operating system and the Unix operating system. In this example, numbering follows the parent standards numbering CSTD 820. Procedures link to the baseline standards that they support. For example, IST, PROC 821 and 822 are directly mapped to the 821 and 822 baselines. In most cases, there is a one-to-one mapping of baseline and procedures in support of the control standard. The figure on the screen shows a close-up of baseline standards and procedures in the policy and standards library tree. Guideline documents most often tied to a specific control standard, as shown on the figure on the screen. Guideline documents, or GUIDs, are useful where there may not be any technology for enforcing controls, but the guidelines provide useful information for process management or controls. When people look for a specific document, the name of the document should tell them all they need to know. After they gain some experience with the taxonomy, they'll know where to look. Implementing your policies and libraries entail 4 major steps. They are building consensus on content, views and approvals for your documents, publication of the documents, and awareness and training. So building consensus. Separating the writing of the actual policy language from the discussion on the intent of the policy change is a good way to build consensus. During this step, you should discuss the drivers for the change in terms of the architectural operating model and principles. This reinforces the standard belief and helps promote the desired culture. Reviews and approvals. Once they are written, you need to share your documents again with those who helped you develop them. Let those employees review the policy document language well before they implement them. These reviews allow you to assess the impact of the policy or standard on the organization before deploying it in a potentially disruptive fashion. Publication. Publishing your policy and standards library depends on the communication tools available to you in your organization. Many organizations use some form of an intranet for internal communications. Different departments may have their own subsection of the intranet, and IS should have its own. An intranet generally has a front page or portal that announces new content on the site. Also includes news, other announcements, and access to standard forums. Then awareness and training. Implementation requires not only educating personnel on each of the core elements, but also in changing the role to emphasize protecting data and systems. An awareness program can motivate employees and promote the shared beliefs discussed earlier in this chapter. Motivating employees is as important as mastering a technology. Motivated employees can deal with the unexpected. This is particularly important when dealing with the unexpected security events. Remember, it's not getting employees to learn the policy that's important. It's motivating employees to execute the policy. In addition, this communication creates a foundation for other discussions. So the Policy Change Control Board. The members of the Policy Change Control Board would include the information security, compliance management, auditing, human resources, leadership from the key information business units, and also project managers. Effective oversight of the policy change ensures that security is implemented in a thoughtful way. Oversight of the policy change process usually falls under an existing committee. The committee members are often senior leaders who represent both the technology and the business interests. These individuals as leaders ensure that the right balance between protecting the organization and operating needs is maintained. It's important that changes not be made unilaterally or cause unexpected consequences. To avoid these situations, form a policy change control board or committee. You can organize this group ad hoc meetings as needed for reviews and approvals. It can also be a standing committee or working group that meets regularly to address changes, additions, and enhancements to policies and standards. You can develop a standard that creates the board and establishes membership requirements. Minimally, you should include people from information security, compliance, audit, HR, leadership from other business units, and the PMs, the project managers. Project managers set the agenda for the meeting, take meeting minutes, assign action items, and follow up on deliverables. So the objectives of the Policy Change Control Board are to assess policies and standards and make recommendations for change, coordinate requests for change, sometimes they'll be referred to as RFCs, ensure that change to existing policies and standards support the organization's mission and goals, review existing changes to the policy framework, and establish a change management process for policies and standards. So best practices for policy maintenance. The policies and standards library is like a tree and over time requires pruning and maintenance. The Policy Change Control Board helps determine what changes should be made to which documents. Other needs for the changes can come from issues related to specific users or groups, and documents may need trivial or isolated changes. One of the tasks of the board is to determine which requests they will address and which ones are normal maintenance requests. So updates and revisions. An update may be considered a non-substantive edit. Examples include updating a position title or department name, correcting a typo, and repairing broken web links. Revisions might be minor or major. A minor revision usually has low significance. For example, a clarification, the wording within a sentence or paragraph. A major revision significantly changes the policy. Examples include new requirements, new limitations, or expanded responsibilities. These types of changes should be sent to the Policy Change Control Board for consideration. Then exceptions and waivers. Look for common problems related to compliance. If the standard cannot be met, very often it's because there is a problem with the standard or the policy. Requests for users and management. Make it easy to obtain feedback on people's actual experience with implementing with the standards. Major requests should be formally documented and sent to the Policy Change Control Board. However, don't ignore the feedback about what's causing people's concerns or prompting questions about the document. and changes to the organization. Companies come and go. Mergers and acquisitions happen constantly. Should you find yourself in a situation where your organization has bought or sold a division and need to revisit the policies and standards for the combined organization, use the tools and techniques you've learned in this chapter to help resolve conflicts or fill in gaps that come about from the change. Business drivers for policy and standards changes. Additionally, there are business drivers for policy and standards changes. They may include the following: business as usual developments. Over time, an organization might realize that meeting policy or standard requirements is impossible, too costly, or unnecessary given changing business conditions. Business exceptions. As the business changes, new systems or processes are introduced. They may vary from what a policy or standard requires. Business innovations. New opportunities for revenue growth or cost reduction can lead to innovative changes that were previously not considered. Standards may need to adapt to these innovations or be adjusted to permit innovations. Business technology innovations. New technology often comes with the unknowable risks until you gain experience using it. Standards may need revisions to allow for the use of the new technology or for use in new ways that were not envisioned when the standards were developed. Strategic changes. An organization may change its business model and come under new regulatory requirements. For example, an organization might purchase a bank or reduce the cost of credit card processing. In this case, changes to an existing standard are far-reaching and may affect every standard in place. Some change requests result in a complete redevelopment of the policies and standard libraries, or at least in one facet of the policy and standards development cycle. So in summary, what we looked at here in Chapter 7 were the core principles of policy and standards design. We looked at implementing policy and libraries, policy change control board purpose and roles, the business drivers for policy and standards changes, and we looked at best practices for policy management and maintenance. Thank you.